Good afternoon. Today is Friday, the 20th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Debi Evans. And we've also got Mark Anderson coming in on a link from the United States. So, theme really of our news today, which as always has come together due to the individual work of the presenters for today's news, is really on the subject of the state, how it is working, how it's deceiving people, and a little bit of what the real agenda is. No better place to start than have a look at the Labour Party and the sorts of images that they're showing very strongly. So here we are, be part of change, join Labour and together we can change Britain. But of course, they don't say changing from what to what, and this is extremely important. The Labour website, just full of these images. Here's Starmer looking particularly bland and authoritarian, and it simply says change. But what on earth are they talking about? Because it's obvious that they're not actually declaring what the change is. That change is going to happen. And here's another one where Starmer is in front of the label, change begins. So I'm going to ask our audience again, what is the change that's being planned and implemented? So how do we dive into this? Well, let's have a little look at the Labour Party and democracy. Now, this is very simplistic, but I've done it in order to try and get our audience today thinking about what they're actually seeing. So, of course, in the UK, at least, everything revolves around the big parties, Labour and Conservative, and that party organisation is the beast, which, of course, ultimately holds power over choosing and getting people like Starmer into the position of Prime Minister. Now, hand in glove with that goes the power of the civil service, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more in just a couple of minutes. But essentially, this is the power base that the public is shown, and we are led to believe that this forms our representative democracy, where basically the nation state is working in the best interests of the public. I believe this is a sham, a complete sham. And let's bring in the other side of the coin, which I'm calling the international collective. Let's remember that funding is the key thing which makes the political system happen, whether it's in UK or in the United States. So that's key. Then we've got very powerful lobbying groups such as the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. We've got the European Union. We've got the World Economic Forum. These are just examples. The powerful United Nations, of course, highly influential. Labour Friends of Israel, very powerful within the Labour Party. And I'm just bringing in another example, the Council on Foreign Relations. But of course, there's the Trilateral Commission. There's many others. And we already know that Starmer has pledged allegiance not to his nation state, but to the international collective, because he was quite happy to say publicly that he would prefer working with the World Economic Forum than Westminster any time. But here's his powerful civil service with a headcount of over 500,000 people. They're all broken down into departments, numbers and categories here. But I'm going to say to our viewers that it's very clear that this organisation has been hollowed out from the inside, in as much as overall it's been captured by the woke international agenda. We can call it woke fascism because the corporates are in there as well. But if you look down the contents of this statistical bulletin on the civil service, you see that everything is being looked at in detail. Sex, age, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, a very big one, religion and belief. Surprisingly, over 50% of the civil service say they're Christian, but of course that's not reflected by the activities of the state. And then if we go in a different direction, we can bring in that Labour system again, but if we have a look at the funding, a big thanks to politics.co.uk that did a really good analysis, and I encourage you to go and see that. Here's some of the sums of money put in. 1 million from Ecotricity Limited, 700,000 from Martin Taylor. I just picked out one person. This is Danny Lou Thompson. Now, could be somebody with a duplicate name, but I'm guessing it isn't. But all we're just showing is here is a person linked ultimately with investment management. I would say that's pretty close to hedge funds. And then when we look at that organisation, we're into Quadrature's Climate Foundation. So this would represent a very powerful lobbying group for this sort of policy into the Labour Party. So if we've got an international change agenda being unleashed on UK, we've got people pumping money into the Labour Party. Effectively, that controls it. What sort of people have we got in the Labour Party? Well, we know Starmer, and we mentioned Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, on Monday. But let's bring him back on screen.
Putin said Russian bases. Putin said don't send tanks. We sent them. Putin said don't send any missiles. We sent them. Putin threatens every few months to use nuclear weapons. It's totally unaccepted. We won't be bullied by Putin's shameless grandstanding.
Well, the point I'm making here is he's mocking a foreign leader of importance, the arrogance, the aggression. This is the sort of people we're dealing with, and they want the war running because it's in the interests of the West. Now, finally, we've got Western media talking about the death toll in Ukraine. Let's have a look at this on screen. And basically, we've now got admission from the Wall Street Journal, at least, of 1 million now dead or injured in the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is, in my opinion, a pretty accurate figure. Let's expand it, 1 million. And ultimately, this war is to be continued in the best interests of the West until the last Ukrainian is dead. More Ukrainian deaths than Russians. The BBC talking about 70,000 Russian dead. The figure that's being talked about widely on the internet about Ukrainian deaths is 300 to 400,000, and this would agree with the figures of about 1 million dead or injured. So these are horrific. This is a horrific state of affairs. This is the mentality of people in politics in UK, and we're focusing on the Labour Party. But the other thing going on, of course, is the police state. We could call it Starmer's Stasi state. And a big thank you to one of our viewers that spotted this police job advert. And what's it about? Well, it's about somebody to work collaboratively as part of analysts, researchers and police officers working under the Strategic Intelligence and Briefing Team related to aggravated activism, strategic protest and significant public order events. Be under no illusion, this is spying on the UK public, and anybody speaking out against the government is now going to come under this sort of scrutiny with arrests and sentencing accordingly. So this is the state, this is Starmer's Stasi state, but of course it's got this huge corporatist element which could also lead it to a description of fascism. Let's have another look at Lammy in action, this time apparently on a softer note. But is that true? Let's have a listen.
But we need a hard-headed, realist approach towards using all levers at our disposal, from the diplomatic to the financial. And I say to you now, these are not contradictions, because nothing could be more central to the UK's national interests than delivering global progress on arresting rising temperatures.
So this is all soft and squidgy dialogue. It's all about saving the world. We are to believe climate change is real and not an in-depth political agenda. And we're to believe that Lammy, the man that wants to keep the killing going in Ukraine, has got the best interests of every human being on the planet with regard to saving us from climate change. Let's have a look at some of his words in detail. That, of course, was just an excerpt from what he said, but here we've got some other quotes. We've seen with the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, the Green Deal in the European Union, and the accelerating transition in China, foreign policy, economic and industrial policy becoming increasingly intertwined. So we're not going to be able to say what's going on because we can't say that it's foreign policy or it's industrial policy or it's economic. It's in a blur. It's in a snake's wedding is my favourite expression. It's in a knot, and the public is not going to untie that knot. And this is because this is strategic globalist agenda. He says, with Ed Miliband, Steve Reed leading COP negotiations on climate and nature, we have a pair of experienced, determined negotiators. The Miliband brothers, of course, coming from a Marxist background. And we've got to push all of this under the UK government in order to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And finally here, to drive forward this cross-government reset even further, I am announcing today that we will appoint new UK special representatives for climate change and nature. And he goes on to say, of course, that he's got Ed Miliband and Steve Reed to support, but they're going to reboot internationally, showing that whether you are from the global north or the global south, we want to forge genuine partnerships to tackle this crisis together. So this is about the complete reorganisation of politics, not only in UK, but also on a world stage, supposedly to protect us from climate change. But of course, with those changes, any other part of our life, any and each part of our lives can be changed under this new system. What is the system? Some people have labelled it as a woke fascism, which I think is pretty accurate. Some people are calling it more a Marxist system. Some people refer to communitarianism. But whatever you choose to label it as, if you look at the detail, this system is hostile to the individual, it's hostile to families, and it's certainly hostile to the nation state, because the nation state needs to be destroyed in order to bring in the Great Reset, which is their ultimate world political agenda. Mark, on that note, let's bring you in, because of course you've been reporting on this from the angle of, in particular, cities, but also looking at the dynamics of this globalist agenda. Welcome, and what have you got for us today?
Well, Brian, this past Wednesday, RFK Jr.'s Children's Health Defense, CHD TV, put on a program called Break the Silence, the UN's One World Government and the WHO's One Health Agenda. And one of the broad themes that was carried out in this, and I wasn't able to cover the whole thing, but I did pick up on a couple key speakers. One of the broad themes was, while they're worried about the vaccination regime, while they're worried about medical tyranny, they're really concerned about the overarching political tyranny that's needed to enforce medical tyranny. So therefore, ceding power or delegating power to the UN and the WHO was roundly criticized. And this is a list of the speakers. The two I covered were Sabelo Sabanda of South Africa and Dr. Astrid Stuckelberger of Switzerland. And the narrative here at the beginning is, what if the UN and the WHO are being used to build a technocratic government over our world where we lose the right to free speech and decision-making? This week, join an empowering online event cleverly countering two things: countering the UN Summit of the Future and countering the WHO's One Health Congress, both of which start today in terms of their preliminary programs. Our Power to the People Summit include informative strategies on how we can take back our freedoms from unelected globalist agendas and their accomplices nationally. And we'll move on from there. This was shown this past Monday on UK column, Summit of the Future. And as it indicates, the action days, the startup stuff starts as of today. The whole thing runs through September 23rd, counting the summit itself. We'll move on. And this is the other plank, the One Health World Congress, as noted, starts today, Cape Town, South Africa. And it includes, of course, the WHO, the UN Environmental Program, and 2 other UN-related entities. And so everything is really kicking off. But one thing I've learned as I covered this was they seem to be falling behind a bit on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and some other matters. The One Health Congress starting today in South Africa. I could get into a lot of it. This is just shown that people can look it up later to read more details. But anyway, the bottom part says that this builds on the success of the 7th World One Health Congress that was held back in 2022 in Singapore. And therefore, this year's event will bring together One Health stakeholders, ranging from science researchers, policymakers, representatives of international institutions, civil society, et cetera, from the private sector around the world. And one of the things left out of this, of course, is the general public. And the presenters at the Children's Health Defense Program took issue with that. And we'll continue to describe what went down at that program. Sabelo Sabanda here, he had a lot to say. He's a lawyer and advocate of the High Court of South Africa, and he notably has worked with the UN's Indigenous Peoples Council. The photos from this event are all original screenshots by me. He addressed the Declaration on Future Generations, which is an offshoot of the Summit of the Future that I mentioned, as this slide shows. And this is the most recent version of the Declaration on Future Generations. And these first 3 planks, Brian, kind of lay the groundwork for what this is all about. And I put the link with this, and that'll be in the show notes so people can read the whole thing if they want to. But these first 3 planks are very fundamental. We, the heads of state and government and high representatives, having met at the Summit of the Future at the UN headquarters on 22 and 23 September 2024. That's coming up, of course. They're looking ahead, reaffirming our commitments to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as our respective obligations, they say, under international law, and also reaffirming our commitments to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the 2023 SDG Summit Political Declaration, and our pledge to future generations as set out inter alia in the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. So the mention there, Brian, of the Charter of the UN and the other entity, the other UN documents, one thing that needs to be mentioned really clearly is those documents have always regarded human rights as being revocable. They're conditional. They're just privileges that are doled out from the state to the people that can be revoked at any time. That's inherent in the language of the Charter of the UN and other UN documents and other UN protocols. Anyway, in terms of the Sustainable Development Political Declaration, this is from a UN press release. And this SDG Summit Political Declaration, going back to 2023, it gets into a lot of things. It says here the adoption of the 10-page document by the heads of state and government and high representatives gathered at the UN in New York back in 2023 in September of that year. That came at a critical juncture as global crises, including armed conflict, adverse climate impacts, and the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, threaten the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And the Secretary General Antonio Guterres went on to say this, Brian, the Sustainable Development Goals need a global rescue plan. And he also noted that the Sustainable Development Goals are at their halfway point to their deadline. So there's some indication, as I mentioned earlier, that this is falling behind once again because it used to be called Agenda 2021, something like that. So they've had to move the goalposts several times. Now, the Rio Declaration that I mentioned just moments ago goes all the way back to 1992, as this slide shows, and that was known as the Earth Summit. And we mentioned that with regards to Stephen Rockefeller recently on the column. And moving on from there, we have a little bit more from Sabelo Sabanda, and he noted there are agencies run by people. He said this during the Children's Health Defense Program this past Wednesday. There are agencies run by people who have not been voted in by any one of us. And as he said that, he focused on Preamble 11 of the document I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Declaration of the Future. And Preamble 11 talks about to build a stronger, more effective, and resilient multilateral system with the United Nations at its core. And Sabelo took issue with this, showing or believing and explaining that is that he sees a lot of UN consolidation of power in the works, and he believes that plank of that declaration proves that. He went on to say, though, in a more reassuring tone, that the people are not well aware of how they've been empowered by their constitutions and their laws. So the US Constitution, other constitutions of other countries, he's saying the laws of other countries do provide some shield, some protection, but the people need to become more knowledgeable of how that works and what it consists of. And they need to work harder to become more informed about what the UN and the WHO are doing to consolidate their power to try and achieve these SDGs by 2030, even though they may be falling behind. So the other speaker I covered, Dr. Astrid Stuckelberger, she also has some UN affiliation, high-level international expert for United Nations agencies, bilateral institutions, and for the European Commission. She's an interdisciplinary scientist at the University of Geneva and Lausanne in Switzerland. And she asked the question, what's wrong with the Pact of the Future? Her answer to that question was it'll transform global governance and turbocharge the UN's Sustainable Development Goals toward a common digital future. And she said, yes, it's normal to have an annual September UN meeting, though she disagrees with the procedure and the content. And the media, of course, is a mouthpiece for the UN's one world governance and one world health, quote unquote. But what's not normal is that the loop of discussion is closed tighter than ever before. And she said the UN is, quote, violating its own instruments, end quote. We have not given consent. I repeat, we have not given consent to transfer power of our governments to the UN, nor for our governments to decide or to make their decisions at the UN. And she added there's a high-tech drive that the people have not accepted or consented to in high technology, including AI. And the people need to be enabled, she said, to opt out of this planned digital world. So those were the most salient points, I believe, Brian, of this past Wednesday's program. And it comes at a very timely moment to counter what the UN and WHO are doing today, right as these summits kick off. And so with that, I believe I have a couple of short announcements.
Mark, I just wanted to say there what wonderful observations by Sabelo Sabanda that he's pointing out that people need to wake up and understand the protections of their own constitution and constitutional structure. This is very, very important. And I believe you've just got a little extra segment here on smart cities.
Yeah, there's an AV program coming up next month. I believe it's on October 10th, where I'll be doing another presentation on smart cities and global cities. But we don't want to let these people rest for 1 second. We want to keep a very close eye on them very well ahead of time. So the Global Parliament of Mayors and the Smart City Expo World Congress are teaming up November 5 through 7 in Barcelona. This slide is from the Global Parliament of Mayors, and the next slide is from the Smart City Expo World Congress itself, the event for better cities, they claim, again, November 5 through 7 in Barcelona, Spain. And this will be included in my AV program. And when it actually comes up and happens, I'll be covering that as well, Brian. So back to you.
Okay. Mark, thank you very much for that analysis. Very good. Debi, let's bring you in because, of course, nature has become such an interesting word. Should we trust Lammy when he's talking about the word nature?
Oh, well, good afternoon, everyone. And yeah, well spotted, Brian. It's the word nature, because everyone's focusing on the word climate. And where are all our politicians? They've only just come back from summer holidays, and now they're all at the conferences, which is where David Lammy, I'm presuming, is going to be as well. But it doesn't mean to say there's nothing happening. And back on the 30th of August, we reported on the news about tradable energy quotas, which really means carbon rationing. But how are they going to introduce this carbon rationing to us all? Well, I want to introduce you to Alex Sobel. He's a Labour MP for Leeds Central and Headingley. He's married with 2 kids and his background is social enterprise. He set up the Net Zero All Parliamentary Group to help secure low carbon. And he was Shadow Minister for Nature Recovery. There's that word again, nature recovery. But he's gone on to do great things. He's not actually in the government at the moment, which is interesting. However, he's gone on to do great things. And here he is being awarded with the prestigious Nature 230 award. There he is pictured with none other than Chris Packham. But let's listen to him putting a question to the Levelling Up Secretary. Only recently in April. Now, he speaks quite quickly and he's quite passionate, but he's talking about zero carbon homes. Have a listen.
Today is Earth Day. The government introduced the zero carbon home standard and then scrapped it. The Code of Sustainable Homes and then scrapped it. We now have the Future Home Standard, which I support, but local authorities such as Leeds want to go above in planning policy to higher standards. Why will the Secretary of State not allow Leeds to build even better zero carbon homes?
Better zero carbon homes. Well, shortly after that, he brought out the Climate and Nature Bill, which is a private member's bill. Now, this was only brought out in May this year. Now, who's heard of the Climate Nature Bill? Because I'll explain why you haven't heard about it in a minute. But when we look further into it, let's look at the passage of the bill. So currently, at the moment, it's only in the first stage. However, if we look further into the bill, we can see that what the aim of the bill is to do is to get the UK to achieve climate and nature, there's that word again, nature targets, to give the Secretary of State a duty to implement a strategy to achieve this target. So what is this duty of the Secretary of State? So the duty of the Secretary of State basically is within 12 months of passing of this act, they have to lay before Parliament a strategy to limit the UK carbon dioxide emissions. Well, I guess that probably includes us as we're humans and we emit carbon dioxide. And we're also going to be ending the extraction of exploration and fossil fuels as rapidly as possible to minimise damage to ecosystems. But the bill goes on to say that we should prioritise avoidance, the loss of nature. We have to adhere to mitigation and conservation hierarchy. Now, I'm not quite sure who those are in the hierarchy, although I think we might come on to find out. But the strategy must not have a negative impact on poorer communities or deprived communities or young people. But they do note here that financially they are going to need to support those whose livelihoods will be affected. So could we be looking at the introduction of universal basic income, I wonder, as a form of compensation? So how do the public get involved? Because this is really important, isn't it? How the public get involved. Well, within 3 months of the passing of this act, apparently they're going to set up a climate and nature assembly where they're going to sample the UK population. Now, this assembly is going to be considering expert advice. We'll come on to that later in the news and see what expert advice they're going to be given. But they're going to need to have a majority of 66%. Interesting statistic there. 66% a majority to rule on what's going to be included in the strategy for the rest of us. And who does it cover? Well, it covers all of us, the UK, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the whole country. And here's the bill itself. We've got, there you go. It's covering all of us. So every single person in the UK watching, it's applicable to us. Here's the bill, which was introduced on the 21st of the 3rd, 24 by Alex Sobel, who you've just seen. And then you've got another few familiar names, Ed Davey, Catherine Lucas, the normal bunch that you would think would be involved in a green agenda. But who are 0 hour? Because this Climate and Nature Bill has been abbreviated to the CAN Bill, C-A-N. Why do we need the CAN Bill? Why is this so important? Well, I can tell you why, because in the next slide, we're going to show you that the government's actually been very deceptive and duplicitous, I believe, because this was formerly known as the Climate and Ecology Bill. But almost by stealth, they've now called it the Climate and Nature Bill. And they note that this is the only proposed legislation before the United Kingdom Parliament that ensures a comprehensive joined-up approach to emergencies. So who have they got? Well, they've got 170 MPs supporting them. They've got 63 peers supporting them. They've got the largest cross-party environmental group in Parliament. Not just that, they've got a load of scientists backing them as well. And here you can see 1,000+ scientists are calling on MPs to prioritise the CAN bill. And you'll see a picture of them outside Parliament, all very much pro this CAN bill, because they want to fast track it or super turbo charge it. So how can you be involved in accelerating CAN? Have a look at this video from 0 Hour.
We can prevent catastrophe by shifting to a zero carbon economy in a way that protects jobs and upgrades our democracy. That's where the bill comes in. It's been written with help from top scientists. Now we need Parliament to make it law, and for that it needs the support of a majority of MPs. The bill will protect and restore forests, soils and ecosystems. It will require the government to rapidly reduce our entire carbon footprint. This means taking responsibility for emissions from imports and dealing with the environmental damage caused by our supply chains.
So there you have it, Zero. There's a longer video online. Please go and look at it because they're a very active group. But if you want regular updates and you want to find out more, then go no further than looking at Grassroots Check-In, where they meet every Tuesday to give you an update. I'm sure you'll all be flocking there.
Debbie, thank you very much for that. Well, once you know where to look for the political agenda, it's easy to see, and this is what we need to be saying to our audience. Once you see it, spread the word, warn other people, and get digging, because, of course, information you find can be extremely helpful to us, and we can help promote that. Now, I just want to say that we would like people to spend a little bit more time on the website. There's a huge amount of material on the website. Mike has produced this little interactive to say, of course, on the website itself, you can see other channels such as X that we're now working on. So there's a lot of information in the website. If you want to support us, click there. But also we're selecting information which we think is important, sometimes very old articles, but which are now very relevant or highly relevant in today's political world, under editor's choice. So you can have a look there. We've also got a comment section. And of course, where a particular interview is taking place, we're also enabling people to share it and make comments. So this is all very important to actually get information out and to help people stay interested in the material. So if you're used to watching us on another channel and you just watch the news, we'd encourage you to go to the website and have a look. And of course, the other key thing is if you do go to the website, you can choose to make a donation or to actually join us as a full-time member, £5 a month or £50 a year or £500 for a UK column lifetime membership. And if you do, this is so important because, of course, this actually keeps us operating, and we want to grow and expand what we're doing. Plus, it gives us some reserves if we're challenged in the future. We're also highlighting the shop here, so you can support us by making a purchase, or indeed you can make a health purchase via Clive de Carl, who we've been supporting. Now, we've got an interview coming up tomorrow, which I think is one of yours, Debbie, if you can give us a little bit more on this one. Dr. Robin Kelly.
I think I might have lost a day there, Brian, because that was shown yesterday. It's Friday today. The weekend is upon us. Yet this is the wonderful Dr. Robin Kelly. He is actually a member of UK Column. He's in New Zealand, trained in the UK. He's how everybody wants a GP to be, seriously. If you don't trust GPs or you don't trust doctors, you're going to trust this one. The Presence, Dr. Robin Kelly. Please watch. It's very uplifting.
Okay, thank you for picking me up on that. Of course, it's because I'm not normally doing a Friday, so my head's usually in a Monday mode, but that's fine. Now, we also just wanted to put out an ad here for an interview with Ben Rubin and Diane Rasmussen-McCaddy. That's going to be 12 o'clock UK time this coming Saturday, tomorrow even, and that'll be on pattern18substack.com, which is Ben Rubin's own channel, so you might like to have a look at that. Now, let's go on to the subject of extreme democracy. Not my words, as we shall see, but important here that this really demonstrates that small things by our viewers and supporters can have a big difference. So I was sent a letter which one of our viewers had received from the Alan Turing Institute. If we expand this, it said you could be one of 32 people selected to take part in a citizens panel on the subject of data and national security. And this panel will answer the important question: new technologies could change how national security agencies use people's data. What impact does this have on public attitudes, trust, and expectations around how their data is used? And the panel has been commissioned by the Centre for Emerging Technology and Security and is a research centre based at the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Note Artificial Intelligence. Well, if we read a little bit more here, we're exploring this question now because new technologies could change how national security agencies use people's data. Intelligence and law enforcement agencies have investigatory powers which are used to protect people across the UK from a range of threats. This means they can use data in ways other government departments cannot, often by gathering people's information about their knowledge. It's important that this is balanced with respect for human rights, including the right to privacy. So this all sounds wonderful. This is another part of the document. If we just pop that one back on screen. This is frequently asked questions, and it says that the panel will follow an established democratic process used all over the world. Well, that's a very interesting statement because we're going to be digging into that a lot deeper. It brings together a group of people selected by lottery who broadly represent the entire community. I'm not feeling encouraged by this so far. It then goes on to talk about the Alan Turing Institute and the Centre for Emerging Technology again, but it also brings in an organisation called Hopkins Van Mill, is a specialist social research agencies. And finally here, the Sortition Foundation, a not-for-profit organisation that specialises in recruiting for these kinds of events. And of course, Ben Rubin has been talking about this, but that was brilliant information from one of our viewers. At the same time, in a conversation with Debi, she mentioned this document. It's from Climate Assembly UK, The Path to Net Zero. Let's pop a little bit of extra information on the screen. And what it's doing is talking about random stratified sampling done by computer. And it says, once the deadline for responses had passed, the Sortition Foundation used random stratified sampling by computer to generate a list of 110 people to become assembly members. The computer selected no more than one person from any single household. And in blue, there's a comment supposedly by a member of the public who said they feel very, very privileged to take part in this. But of course, what you can see is unaccountable people selecting individuals using their algorithms and calling this democracy. So if we just move on a little bit, when I look at documents, I always go and look at the small print. And buried away in footnotes here was a particular gentleman. His name is Ariel Procaccia. And he's been working on this sort of material with his team at Harvard University and the Carnegie Mellon University. Let's have a little listen to this video, or watch this video clip to see what he's talking about.
So the topic of the talk is extreme democracy. And I want to start with a quote from Pia Mancini. She's an Argentinian kind of politician, a new kind of politician. She gave a very popular TED Talk a couple of years ago. And in this talk, she quoted Marshall McLuhan, who was a Canadian professor, as saying that politics is solving today's problems with yesterday's tools. And the point I want to make is kind of similar, which is that, the world has really changed in the last decades with modern technology, but the way we do democracy hasn't really fundamentally changed for centuries. So it seems like really a good time to rethink how we do democracy. In particular, the theme of the talk is that computer science has a lot to contribute to this discussion. So I want to argue that we should be thinking both about how we do democracy, the practice of democracy, and also the ways in which democracy can be applied. So trying to increase the reach of democracy by thinking about new applications domain through, you could call it democratic thinking and computational thinking. So I'm going to illustrate this theme through 3 projects that we've worked on recently. One is in the space of liquid democracy, which is a paradigm that allows voters to delegate their votes, and these delegations are transitive. The second is going to be participatory budgeting, which is the idea that a city can allocate its budget by eliciting preferences from its residents and aggregating them to get a budget. The third part, I call it virtual democracy. It's a term that I came up with for the purposes of this talk. But the idea is that we'll make decisions by having a virtual election among machine learning models of real voters. And I'll show you how we want to use this approach in order to make ethical decisions in AI. So this is where liquid democracy comes in. You could say that it's a paradigm that lies between direct democracy and representative democracy. And the idea is that as a voter, I can either vote myself directly, or if I feel that I don't have the time, that I don't have the information, I can choose to delegate my vote to another voter. And like I said before, delegations are transitive in the sense that if A delegates to B and B delegates to C, C would be able to vote on behalf of both A and B.
So not to worry, extreme democracy, liquid democracy, these people have created it. They are completely unaccountable. Their computer algorithms are completely unaccountable, but trust them, they're going to be selecting us to give them the decision that they wanted in the first place. Debi, let's bring you back again, because you've been really looking at these citizens' assemblies and the dangers. And of course, this type of liquid democracy relies very much on this practice.
I have indeed, and it's going to be a case of careful what you wish for, because how many of us are ever going to trust a politician again? So what better way than to get the citizens to... We'll set the rules. How about we set the rules? Have a look at this video.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time.
So who's it going to be that's going to be making the new rules? So I always go straight to the UK Column website to research, and I found on the website a reference to a wonderful Ian Davis blog actually, called Sorting Sortition. This is, if you're not a member of the UK column, you find absolute jewels in the forums. I really would recommend that you join up and have a look. But if we go further into Ian's article, we can see that this is a select by lot. This is a random selection to populate assemblies or to fill political positions, to deliberate on issues and to deliver collective judgments. So this is what sortition actually means. And he talks about the Sortition Foundation as being a transatlantic organisation with its offices conveniently in Cambridge and Portland. But back in 2019, the BBC were actually reporting on this and on about how 30,000 households had suddenly received a letter inviting them to join a citizens' assembly. Well, did you get a letter? And what can the public do to cut carbon emissions? So did you get a letter? Well, this little bit of video, obviously some people did. Have a look.
You could be one of over
100 people selected to take part in the UK-wide Citizens' Assembly on how
should the UK tackle climate change.
So this weekend is going to be about introducing you to climate change in a thorough way.
It was really exciting. To be told that I was selected just seemed like a very rare opportunity.
Initially, I wasn't sure what it would be like, so I hadn't done anything like that before.
Perfectly honest with you, I didn't have a clue what zero carbon was.
I didn't know enough about climate change. I was open to information.
There were so many different perspectives and opinions. So many people of different ethnicity, different ages.
It was so nice to see, the representation of the UK.
The fact that you've given up time to come here and take this seriously is of the greatest importance.
It felt like the community kind of working together towards a problem that the whole world needs to face, to be fair.
Obviously at the moment we're all on lockdown.
Moving on to 3 internet weekends was quite good. We were still investigating things on our own. I'm not saying we're experts now, but we all have opinions.
Everybody's had the taste of this cleaner air. Surely most people would want that for their children and their grandchildren.
Well, if we treat climate change the same way as we're treating coronavirus, then we can do it.
We all want the government to take heed of our recommendations.
They need to act on it, but also to act on it fast. So it's not about saying, okay, we just keep deliberating over it over the next 1 year, 2 years.
They are by law bound to try to get to this target.
It's got to be done in a fair and positive way.
So if we don't act now, we're just going to run out of time and there won't be a future for any of us.
And if we can show that we can do it, then perhaps others will follow. I think somebody has to be a leader.
So we have actually got another piece of video, and I think we'll hold on to that for extra because there is so much on this, because I want to go back to look at what Brian was looking at a minute ago, the path to net zero. And this document here is a joint endeavour between Parliament and people. It's written by Mel Stride and Darren Jones. But if we go further on into the report and have a look, we can see that they're looking at citizens having a crucial role to play. 108 citizens were given the space to understand or discuss what actions the UK should take. So why is it important? Well, in the next slide, it'll tell you that the Climate Assembly, the members are actually going to mirror the voice of the UK population. So that's you and me. And they've been busy organising these weekends in Birmingham. So when you see what they say, the members say, I mean, they think it's like they've won the lottery. I felt like I'd won the lottery when I got my letter. I'd be daft not to do it. It's amazing to get the chance to have a say and influence what may happen in the future. And I was in the army for 22 years, so I've not got a problem meeting new people. So this is why it's so important. But who are they selected from? Because, Brian's talked about the Sortition Foundation. Ben has talked about Sortition as well. And this is being selected by the Sortition Foundation. And here we've got a quote, I think, from Sir David Attenborough, because he's hugely supportive of this. So he's very grateful to the 110. I think we must have lost 2 somewhere, but he's grateful to the 110 people who came from all corners of the world to be part of this. So let's look at the stages that you have to go through. If you got your letter, you got the letter, you've been randomly selected, you're really intrigued and you've responded to it. Stage 2 means that you go through a computer random. So a random stratified sampling done by the computer. And then in stage 3, really, it's, well, how would you like to travel and what dates are you available? So that's the liaison and final replacements. So let's look at the assembly makeup and look at the document, because it's a very long document, but they'd say that they're taking people from all sides of the argument. There's a table there as well that if you go to the document, you can see where the members have been made up from. And the weekends seem to be a really jolly affair because they've had 3 weekends. This has all been going on behind closed doors, folks. I mean, I didn't know these things were happening, but they obviously have been. They had 3 jolly weekends, but as you heard before, the 4th weekend was cancelled because of lockup. So they had to do all of their work online. So there's loads of experts and facilitators that go to this conference. And please look to the document because there are so many. But I wanted to see who was involved from wider society. So who have they brought in? Well, we've got the Bishop of Salisbury. We've got the President of the National Farmers Union. We've got the Secretary General for the Muslim Council, Martin Lewis from the Money Saving Forum, the Chief Rabbi's there, the Archbishop of Westminster's there, the RSPB, even the CEO of the NHS. So there's a whole bunch of very varied people. But which organisations are involved? So we've got 3 that are involved in citizens' assemblies. We've got the Involve Foundation, and the Involve Foundation actually produced that piece of video about should we trust politicians. They're a public participation charity, and apparently they ensure that we get high quality citizens' assembly. Well, I'm not quite sure how we do that if it's random selection, but hey, perhaps someone else will make a comment on that. And then we've got the Sortition Foundation, which is not for profit and uses randomly selected people. And then we've got My Society, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise, and they use data. They're very data-driven. So I always like to go to see who's funded this. Who's funded it? Well, it's been funded by the House of Commons, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, the European Climate Foundation. This is such a big topic. I'm only skirting literally the top of it. And you'll see Rachel Reeves' name there. Hasn't she been busy? And of course, now she's not part of this, but she was. So who are involved?
Debi, if I could just come in very briefly, as you showed that weekend and the very influential people that are brought in, my mind was taken right back to the common purpose technique, which I observed and exposed many years ago, when people were effectively being controlled by being introduced to people that they would take at their every word. So if the local chief of police spoke to a small group, people would believe what he or she said to the audience on policing. The chief executive from the local council, MPs, whoever it was, came in. Of course, the audience of ordinary men and women was highly influenced by the people brought in. So these, to my mind, are highly controlled interactions once the computer has selected the individuals.
Absolutely, 100%. And perhaps in extra, we can talk in a little bit more detail about these 3 organisations. We can talk about Involve, we can talk about the Sortition Foundation, but perhaps we should end this segment really on how this is going to happen. And if we go right to the end of the segment, we can look at behaviour change, because that's where this is all coming from, of course, is behaviour change. And you'll see a slide with Professor Nick Chater from Warwick Business School. And Professor Nick Chater is organising this whole behaviour, the Climate Change Committee. You can see his picture there. And if you go to the next slide, he says, and I quote, "We, the citizens, see new rules as having wide support and adherence. The public have made decision through citizens' assemblies and haven't been imposed directly by government." So there's so much more to come on this, but basically we're looking at 2-tier citizenship, because have you got a letter? I haven't.
It's pretty incredible, Debbie, isn't it? It's giving the illusion that people are actually fully involved in democracy, but the reality is that they are being controlled. And I note that in our chat box, one of our audience today started to talk about the Delphi technique. And I think that member of the public, whoever you are, was absolutely on the money, because the Delphi technique is the means by which the public is controlled in a room to produce the outcome that the organisers of the event want in the first place. Mark, let's bring you in. You're on the subject of unexpected deaths here, but of course, all of that has also happened as a result of the COVID lockdown policy, which was introduced with a lot of psychological manipulation of the population. So really, you're showing us how dangerous these sorts of policies are when people take them at face value and don't understand what's actually being done, so therefore they can't challenge it properly.
Indeed, Brian. This is a very sad and jarring event. Not that there haven't been a lot of other people that have suddenly died on a sports field or during training, or they almost died and had a very serious medical situation. But this one is particularly noteworthy. Channel 4 WSMV, a NBC affiliate out of Tennessee, reported that a 15-year-old died suddenly while jogging, and he's a cross-country runner, so it's a completely non-contact sport. We don't need to think about performance-enhancing drugs being involved. And he's out of Cheatham County, Tennessee. His name, Tristan Franklin. He was born September 6, 2008. He passed away suddenly while jogging for cross-country training August 27th. So he died just shy of his 16th birthday. This is his obituary out of Tennessee, a shot of that. And I bring this up mainly, Brian, because of the way the media is handling this. And, you know, you could think about older athletes that have been in high contact sports for years, football, your kind of football and my kind of football, other contact sports. Maybe they're on performance enhancing drugs. Maybe they've had birth defects. Maybe there have been other factors as to why they might die or have a very serious medical event. But we all know and strongly suspect that the COVID vaccinations, the mRNA injections, have played a role in this. It's just a question of degree. Now, that media slide, I was still wanting to stay on that for just a moment. I always ask the humorous question, how many mainstream reporters does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, a lot. So they needed 3 reporters from this NBC affiliate. And when they reported on this, it was purely emotionalism, just an emotional vignette. Zero inquiry, zero curiosity as to why a perfectly healthy 15-year-old would just drop dead on the spot while jogging. And he did not die later at the hospital. He literally died right on the ground. And so this news affiliate was really lazy about this. This next slide is from the state of Nevada, a commentary attached to their website. At least 69 athletes collapse in 1 month, many dead. This is from 2021. And so that's an interesting read. I believe we'll have the link to that in the show notes. But the situation is such, Brian, where I called the media station that I just mentioned. I called the newsroom yesterday and I said, do you know why or by what means this 15-year-old passed away? It's not like he was some older athlete in a high contact sport. It's not like he was in some high risk category. And she was very lackadaisical, this reporter. I said, is there going to be an autopsy in the first place? And if so, do you know when you'll have the coroner's report? And she vaguely thought there might be an autopsy, and she didn't know when the coroner's report would come in. But there was also an article, Brian, on that same news organization's website, very, very critical of the idea of medical freedom, and very, very critical of people who suspect vaccinations, especially the COVID vaccination, are very hazardous or dangerous. And so the fix already seems to be in. But this is a particularly tragic item I'll be keeping a close eye on, and I'm going to keep calling that newsroom every few days until I get an answer, until I find out whether there's a coroner's report and see what the actual cause was. But what I suspect is if they were to find out it was from vaccination, I don't believe they would report it. But I'm going to really dog them on this, and we'll see what results I get.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. And yeah, tragic event, whatever the circumstances. Debi, let's just bring you on briefly because, of course, we don't have to worry in UK. We have the Medicines and Health Regulation Authority protecting us from all of those nasty pharmaceutical companies. Do we?
Oh, and this week it was the MHRA board meeting. Stay tuned for extra. I've got news. But Dame June's going to be leaving, isn't she? So there's a job coming up, and they've advertised the job. The CEO of the MHRA commanding a nice juicy salary of between, what's that, 160,000 and 200,000. There's a bit more I can add on that in extra too. But I thought, shall I apply for a new job? I mean, I love the job that I have with the UK column, trust me. But you know what? I do fit the criteria. So when you go to look at the job description, you can see you don't need to be a medical professional. Well, I am. That's helpful. You don't need to know anything about patient safety, really, but I do. You do need to have sat on a board and been mixing with lots of people. And I was, as a government advisor. So the position specification pretty much fits me. And applications close 7th of October. Do you think I should apply for the CEO of the MHRA? And do you think if I did apply, they would interview me? But maybe there's somebody else that's watching, one of our viewers, one of our members, who would also like to apply. 7th of October.
Well, Debi, thank you for that. I detect some chaos in the MHRA as more and more questions are being asked about their appalling performance in safety or protecting the public during the so-called COVID pandemic. So I think this is really interesting. Should you apply? Well, I think you should. Let's see what they have to say about you. And if any of our audience have got an opinion on that, please let us at UK Column know. We must end there. So I'm going to say a big thank you to you, Debi, and to Mark. Really important information, I believe, in today's news. So for the audience, please get researching yourself and send us anything you think is important. We must end there. If you're a member of UK Column, join us for extra in a few minutes. If not, for the rest of the audience, we will be back on Monday at 1 o'clock. See you then. Bye-bye.